Hey folks, Cool18 here, and welcome to another sort of Unity 3D tutorial, but actually it's going to be more of a Blender tutorial. I've been working on a little bit of game, still very early prototype phase, obviously here, a little bit of a, I don't know, some sort of city builder, tower defense, kind of economy kind of game. I don't know how to define it yet, but very, very early prototype phase. So what you can look at right now is I've got my little peasant over here, I've got some trees that have popped up, and I can build other buildings, but most buildings can't use logs directly. They've got to use actual lumber. So the first thing I'm going to do is build a lumber mill. So now my little peasant is going to go over here, he's going to chop down a tree, he's going to bring it over here, and I think once he brings 2 logs over, then the lumber mill will be constructed, and then he's going to keep bringing logs over to the lumber mill, where the lumber mill now, with the producing the smoke out of the chimney, that's the indicator that is currently working, and it will produce logs. And then I can go and say put down a flour mill, and there we go. As soon as the logs or lumber starts to get produced from the lumber mill, it'll bring it over, just waiting for a second piece to be produced here. And then we'll bring it over and finish up this this flour mill, at which point my little peasant will start picking grain. And oh, nope, this job got in the queue first, so bring more logs over to the lumber mill. But there we go. Now he's going to start picking grain and bringing it over there. So it's a very early prototype phase, and also it's considerably early prototype art. Now I do find it's important to try to get to some actual art as quick as possible. It doesn't have to be great art, but the sooner you can replace the sort of default boxes that you might develop your game with actual art, I find it really goes a long way towards doing that. So this is why we're going to be doing a very simple basic tutorial in Blender for programmers who are looking to make sort of simple art. I'm not an artist. It's the biggest reason I haven't done a proper Blender tutorial yet. It's just, I'm terrible at art. So it's not going to be particularly impressive here. That's some annoying spam there. Okay, good. So this is more or less what you would get if you were to open Blender by default. The one exception is you won't get things in the bottom left corner of the screen. This is indicating what keys I'm pushing at any given time. So you can see now I'm holding down the middle mouse button, and if I hold down the middle mouse button, I can pan around the scene. If I scroll the mouse wheel, you can see here it's causing a zoom. So I'm going to try my best to say exactly what I'm clicking at any given point, but if I don't, you can look there. I'm also going to try to keep the pace up relatively quick, because you can always pause, rewind, and that keeps the action going. And I've already talked longer than I meant to, so let's get started. So Blender is a 3D modeling program. You make 3D models out of this that you can then use inside of your game, such as Unity. As mentioned, I'm not a very good artist, so we're going to try to do the best approximation of different building types that we can. So again, this is the default view. By default, and you can see a little bit more clearly over here, there are 3 objects in the scene. There's the camera, a cube, and a lamp. So there's the cube here, and I can select things by right-clicking on them. There's the camera here, and then there's light here. Left-click does not do what you might expect normally, which it moves this little weird 3D cursor around. And we're going to talk about it more later, but left click is actually not something you use as often in Blender as right click, because right click is your selection cursor and is therefore quite handy. So usually you don't actually want a scene with all this stuff in it. This works great if you're doing some sort of render. Like if I actually click this render button over here, it'll render the scene in full 3D glory, and if there was more materials and lightings and things, it would look very, very nice in here. But we are just using this to model stuff for our 3D program, so we actually want to get rid of everything. So the first hotkey we're going to show you is A. A selects everything or deselects everything, right? If I have one thing selected and I hit A, it just deselects. If I have, or I guess that's the best way to say it, is if I have anything selected, it deselects. But if I have nothing selected, it selects everything. So A is really handy, because I'm constantly, you'll see me constantly tapping A back and forth as I work to make sure that I don't have anything weird selected accidentally. Next hotkey is to delete things. Now you can just hit the delete key. I tend to often just hit X as well, which is the delete hotkey, and we're just going to clear that all up. Now this 3D cursor here, this controls where things get spawned. So for example, let's say I'm ready to start working right now. I'm not quite yet, there's more setup, but let's say I were, and the 3D cursor's over here, and I'm going to hit Shift A to add something. We're going to talk more about this in a second. You're going to see it's going to show up over here, and if I click there and I do the same thing, it's going to show up there. And if I click there and I add a sphere, it's going to show up there. So what I want to do is I want to set up a decent initial situation here. So what I would really like is my 3D cursor to be in the middle of the my mesh because that's, or my grid, because that's normally where I'm going to want things to spawn. So, you know, I could sort of try to guess here, but it's really hard in a 3D view. You can see I'm actually below the grid. Let's go there. It's like, oh, I'm in the wrong place. Listen, well, there's a few things you can do with camera views from the top, front, and right. This is using the numpad. You can sort of cycle around this way. You can also move around in little increments if you wanted to with the numpad, right? 7, 1, and 3. And that could get you a little bit more precision with your 3D cursor. But really what we want to do is we want to tell it, listen, go right to the middle of the screen. So how do we do that? Well, the most powerful tool in Blender is the spacebar. The spacebar brings up this little menu that you can type in, and it will bring, it's got all your commands basically, and you can type in it to search for something. And actually we can see right away one of the options here, snap cursor to center, which is actually what we want. But let's say we didn't know that. So we want to, okay, this is our 3D cursor. So we know it's something with our cursor. So we could start typing cursor, and then we could see all the options there. Oh, snap cursor to center, that's good. Or we could go the other way, and I want it to center, there we go, snap cursor to center. There. Now some of these things in the list have hotkeys, some don't. And some things like Shift A brings up another sort of sub-menu for creating things. It's a hotkey that leads to a menu. But I could also, if I don't remember Shift A, I could just type cube. There we go. So just space, cube, will bring that up. Space, very, very, very handy. Okay, so we've got our scene cleared. We've got our cursor in the middle. Is there anything else we want to set up as a default here so that we never have to really worry about this again? Well, for one, I don't like the fact that the default is in this perspective mode. And what does that mean? Well, let me go and add a cube in the back and add a cube, oops, near the front. See, I'm not following my own little advice here. We're going to talk about how to move things in a second. All right, so I've got 2 cubes in the scene, and one of the things you can see is the cube in the back is smaller than the cube in the front, right? Well, it's not smaller, it just looks smaller because it's further away. If I go side by side, they are the same side, and if I go this way, well, the cube in the back is rendered smaller, right? Things that are further away look smaller. So if I go back to the top here, if I grab this cube and hit Shift D and move it way, way back, and then look this way, you can see it's even more pronounced, right? This cube is tiny on the screen compared to the cube in the front. And that's realistic, and that's a good way to set up to actually view scenes. But I find when I'm modeling, it's counterproductive. So I like to hit 5 on the numpad to switch to orthographic mode, which is no projection. And now everything on the screen, it doesn't fade to a small point in the background. It can lead to weird optical illusion in that this cube in the back looks like it might be bigger than the cube in the front, right? Especially if I get rid of this one. This cube, if your brain is thinking perspective, you might think this cube is smaller, but on the screen they're actually exactly the same size. And the reason this is handy has more to do when you're working with just a single object, and you go into edit mode, which is what I'm going to do now, and I'm going to go into Z for the wireframe as well. And the reason that's handy is if we were to look at this cube from the front, if we're in perspective mode, and you're trying to work on this cube, it's kind of weird because things don't line up. Like I'm in the forward view right now, or I'm in the top view right now, and you know the things don't really line up. But if I'm in orthographic view, now everything lines up. All the vertices on the edges here are perfectly aligned. So I tend to work in orthographic view like this whenever possible. So I'm going to hit Z to go back to solid view. I'm going to select everything and delete it. I'm going to snap my cursor to the center. I'm going to go into orthographic view, and I'm going to set my view to the top, which is how I like to start working, generally speaking. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to save all this as a default. So I'm going to say save startup file, and now, oops, I don't know if I actually confirmed here. There we go. And now, this is the view that I'm going to get whenever I open Blender from scratch. So I'll prove it, we'll close it, we'll open Blender, and boom, we're back in here. Great. So, excellent way to start your work environment. Now, let's actually get to modeling. So what am I going to do first? I think the first thing I want to do is actually build... My screencast keys on? No, they're not. Boom. There we are. First thing I want to do is build a better looking windmill, because I know what a windmill should look like, more or less. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by building a cube. So I'm going to add a cube to the screen here. Now, first thing you'll notice is the cube does stick out past the bottom of the screen. So what I would like to do is move it up. There's a few different ways that you can move objects in Blender. You can grab these axes that you can see here, and you can actually left click on those and then drag them around. So I could drag it up, and, you know, I could look at it this way, and, try to line it up to the bottom. That's one option. The thing I tend to use the most actually is the G key, G for grab, I guess. And if you hit G, then you will grab it and move it that way. And if you're locked to an axis, then it'll only move it. So right now, it's not moving it sort of forward and backwards. It's just moving it up and to the left and right. Whereas if I went to the side view, then I would just be moving it forward and backwards and up and down, but there would be no actual left and right motion on the screen. And if you're in the 3D view, it's sort of, it's on an angle, and I don't tend to work on things this way. So that's one way to move things, and that's definitely fine. But you'll find if you move these objects like this, like if I move this object over here, and then brought this into Blender, or into Unity, my object would not be in midair like this. And the reason is that Unity doesn't really care where your objects are in the scene. It's a bit of a gray area. If you've got multiple objects, then, it's a bit more complicated than that. But assuming you've just got this one object in the scene, Unity doesn't care where this object is in the scene. It only imports this one object, and it cares about the pivot point, the center of this object. See this yellow dot that's in the middle of our cube? Literally in the middle of our cube, that is what Unity is going to import as the sort of 0, 0, 0 coordinate of our object. So even if, let me undo here with Control Z, even if I went ahead and I positioned my cube up here above the ground, if I brought this into Unity and put this into my scene, it would start off sticking into the ground just like this, which is very unappealing. So there's a few different ways to fix that. And the best way, well, hold on. If you have moved things in object mode like this. Let me move the 3D cursor out of the way. If you've moved things like this and you want it to be like this, and you're not going to follow my next advice, which is the best way of doing it, and you need to reset the origin of the object so it's actually at the center of the grid here, so that when you import this cube into Unity, it's floating in midair. Well, there's a way to do that. The shortcut key for it is Control A, and what you want to do is you want to apply your location changes. Boom. If I do that, you'll notice my cube is still here, but my origin point is right at the center. Now I can still move, but this origin point here is what is going to be used as a 0, 0, 0 point. So now I'm going to have an object that floats when I bring it into Unity. Okay, a lot of people make this mistake and get very confused about it. So that's one way of doing it. And also, if you've done any rotation here, same thing will apply, or scaling. So that's S, R, G. Those are your basic commands to manipulate your objects. Those will not be applied into Unity unless you go Control A, will apply the scale and rotation. Now that will be locked in. Now, we have been doing all this in object mode down here. So we're moving complete objects. And that's one of the reasons that it's not going to behave properly with Unity. Let me go ahead and delete my object here. And let me recreate my cube. Whoops. Let me snap my cursor to center and then recreate my cube. The way you should probably make these changes is in edit mode. So what does that mean? So instead of moving objects around, I'm going to hit tab, which is the shortcut key, but you can also choose it from here. You can go into edit mode, right? So tab will change between object mode and edit mode. In edit mode, you are editing the object, and I can grab individual vertices here that control the cube and grab them and manipulate them. I can also grab all of them by doing A, move to the front view, and now I can move up. And note my little yellow dot, right? The little yellow dot here from my pivot point is not moving. If I do this, my yellow pivot point is still at the origin. And that's exactly why I recommend doing all your editing here. Anyway, I've dilly-daddled too long. Let's get on to specifics. So one of the things is I have a very shaky hand and, a terrible eye for art. So trying to move things and position things manually, that's not my style. I would much rather type things in. I'm a programmer, goddammit. So what I'm going to do is I want to move this upwards. Now, first of all, I've got G, and this is sort of free movement. I can lock this to an axis. So if I hit Z, now I'm only moving it along the Z axis. Do note that the axes in Blender are different from the axes in Unity. So in Unity, Z is your sort of backwards forward, but in Blender, it's up and down. It's not a problem. Unity sort of deals with it. We'll talk about it later. So, this is already better because I can sort of just, align things on one axis. If I hit X and I do that, and if I hit Y, well, you're not going to be able to see it from this view, but if I go back to grab here and hit Y, X, Z, there, right? Very handy. And also if I've grabbed this and if I hit Shift Z, whoa, grab, Shift Z, oh, it's not showing properly, but I'm not moving up and down now. I'm only moving along the X and Y, and that's all. Maybe if I hit G and then do Shift Y, you can see more clearly. I'm moving up and down and left and right, but you actually can't tell at all in this particular perspective. Let's try it this way. Not Z. There we go. Now it's a little bit more obvious. I'm not moving up and down by hitting Shift Z. Just backwards and forward, left and right, but not actually up and down. Or if I do Shift Y, then it's up and down, left and right. But I can't, there's no way for me to move my mouse to go backwards and forward. So that's, that's pretty good. But I still like a little bit more precision. So I'm going to go grab Z, and then I'm actually just going to type in what I want my move to be. So I want to move it up by 1 unit, because right now it's down 1 unit. You can see the grid here in the background, right? This is 1 unit over 1 unit, 1 unit, 1, 1, and so on. So it is sticking into the ground by 1 unit, so I want to GZ1. There we go. I can also do GZ.5, or I think I can do 1/2. Oh, actually, GZ1/. Oh, no. Slash just goes into tenths right away, or fractions. So if I wanted to go GZ/3, that would bring it up by 1/3 of a unit. That's what it is. I tend to work in decimal, 0.5 and so on. But there we go. Now we have very precise cube movement. Now, the size of my cube is definitely a thing. For my game here, I like my objects to be, I'm going to say about a 4x4 base is going to be a reasonable size for my game, based on the scale I'm imagining now. My people are about 2 units tall. And skinny. And so, I mean, that would be an unrealistically small building. But the reason I say sort of 4x4 base is because, well, if my people are 2 units tall, then I can make my doorway 2 units tall. So my building needs to be a little taller than that. And I felt that like the extra width of a 4x4, it was decent. It's got a huge oversized door, but again, very sort of cartoony and ludicrous kind of thing. So different ways I can do that. I could grab, so I can use B to box select and grab like that. You can also right click. And actually, I'm going to show off the box select here because it's going to demonstrate something. If I do this and I grab and do that, you might think, okay, that's working out good. Let's turn to the angle and see what happened. You'll notice it didn't grab this bottom vertice over here. And that's because by default, it only grabs things that you can see. So again, if I box select everything here and grab it like this, you can see that one vert in the background did not get grabbed. Sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad. In fact, generally speaking, I don't like it because I always forget that something's not going to get grabbed and I tend to mess up my shapes. 2 options. One, you can hit Z and work in wireframe mode, and that will work fine because you can now see all the points and it goes. The other option, if you like solid mode but you want the ability to select things in the background, you can click this little icon here, which is limit selection to visible. Click that, it'll give you kind of a ghostly wireframe in the background. And now if you, box select, it will grab everything in the back. So like I said, one option is, you can manually drag things around or resize things. Obviously, we don't want to do that. We want to use scale. And all I have to do is scale it by 2. Scale 2. There we go. And now I'm going to have a 4x4 object. But if I do that and go back to the front, you'll notice I'm sticking into the ground again. Why is that? Let me undo a sec. It's because by default, the pivot point of my object when doing edits is the median point, the middle of everything that I've got selected. So if I grab just the top here and I scale this, it'll scale based on the midpoint of all these top vertices. And if I grab everything on the side, like that. If I grab everything, then it's going to scale based on the middle here. And often that's correct, but in this case I don't really want to do that. So what I can do is I can change the pivot point based on, say, the individual origin. Nope, that's not the one I want. Active element? No. Oh, all right. Well, I always do it with the 3D cursor, but I thought I could show a different way. Generally speaking, what I do is I put the 3D cursor where I want it to be, like snap cursor to center, right? And then what I do is I set my pivot point to the 3D cursor, and then I scale around that. So scale by 2 around the cursor, now it's there. Of course, I could scale it first and then move it up or something like that, and that would be totally fine, but we're intentionally showing sort of like weird behaviors that you guys can work around it later on. Okay, so I like that as a base. I think that's going to be just fine as a general sort of footprint, but I want it to look a little bit different. It's going to be a relatively simple structure, but I want a little bit more detail to it. Overall, should I just roughly block it out? Sure. Let's take the top. We're going to scale it down a little bit. Although, see, now I want to switch back to the median point. I'm going to scale it down just a little bit. Then I want to extrude. So E is an extrude which starts a new block from there, right? So I think, already vaguely, stick a big fan in the front of this, you've got, the crudest windmill ever built. And it's viable. But let me undo a couple of steps here. Oops, redo one step. If I extrude and then hit escape, I still have that extruded bit. I can still grab this and move it around, okay? But right now it's superimposed. What I can do is I can scale this bit down slightly and then up, and maybe scale the top down to there a little bit more as well. So in my head, what I'm imagining is that this bottom part is made out of stone and this top part is maybe made out of a wooden structure, right? So, very, very simple. This is going to be super crude, but it's just so that I have something to look at when I'm playing the game. So, all right, that's a decent first step. So what's next? Let's try to model some sort of door here. What are we going to do for the door? Well, so I've dropped back in the object mode. And the door, let's just use another cube, another rectangle, and make that the door. And that'll be perfectly fine for our purposes. Now, I'm back in object mode. I could just add another cube. So you'll see I've got 2 cubes here in my world. And I can, have this thing positioned right. But I don't have to do that. I can also work in the same mesh and add a cube in here. You'll notice the menu is slightly different, but most of the options are still there. So now I can add a cube, and it's part of the same object, which is probably a better idea. Although there are pros and cons to doing things. So now I'm going to go into the right-hand view, and I'm more or less going to manually position this cube here. I'm going to grab these, make this a little bit thinner. Actually, I guess I can keep sticking like that. That's fine. I want to just select this door part. How do I do that? Because if I were to say box select, then I would also get the bottom vertices of my windmill object, which is no good. So a couple of ways. One, you can sort of mouse over your object and hit L, and it will just select it. Or if you've got any part of the object selected, you can do a Control L, and it will select the entire object. Or that entire sort of connected mesh. So I'm going to grab my door. I'm going to move it to be kind of like this. I'm going to grab the top part and move it like that. I guess I'll make it a little taller because my people are 2 units tall. There. And, oh, certainly narrower. Right, so we're going to scale it in the X direction and bring it down like that. So we've got a door. It's going to be a little slanted to go with the structure, but that's going to be fine. Imagine, once we paint that to a wooden structure, or a wooden texture, and we get a rocky texture over here and another wood texture over here, it's going to be totally fine, totally believable for my very simple programmer graphics that I'm looking to do. All right, now I want to get the windmill bit, which is supposed to spin around. Now, I could continue to add it to my main object, which is still called cube, which seems a little bit of a misnomer at this point. So let's call it windmill body. All right, my windmill body over here. And so, yeah, I could add the mesh to that, but I'm actually going to want the... inside of Unity, I'm going to want to animate the fan blades to spin when the windmill is working, when the flour mill is working and is actually milling grain. So I'm going to make it a separate object here. So we're going to actually have 2 objects. We're going to have the windmill body, which is going to be relatively static, and then we're going to have the fan bit, which is going to be animated inside of Unity. This is different from making an animation inside of Blender, which you would use for things like someone who is walking. You would design their animation there, and we'll maybe look at it one day. We'll take a look. So what do I want? I want a cylinder. So let's add a cylinder, because this is going to be my axle that everything is going to work on. Now, my cylinder is way down here. Let's switch to X-ray view for a little while. First of all, this is a way too high quality cylinder. We don't need this many sides. We want to trim down how many vertices and triangles that we actually have to render. So over here on the right hand side, you can see I've got this add cylinders menu that came up when I actually added the cylinder. Now if I click on something else, it doesn't go away. Although if I make any changes now. Really? What? If I go into edit mode, okay, if I go into edit mode and then come out, now I no longer have the ability to modify that. I was actually surprised I could modify it as long as I could. Let's add the cylinder. Oh, I moved my 3D cursor. Undo. Snap cursor to center. Add my cylinder. Okay, so back over here, you can change the number of vertices that make up the sides. You can scale it up or down, right? So if you need a really fine really fine cylinder, you can do that. But in practice, you don't need that. I'm actually going to go 8 sides, and frankly, I could probably make do with less. But let's go with 8 sides, and then you can adjust the radius here. But obviously, we can scale everything once we get editing as well. Same thing with the depth. Right, so I'm not too concerned about these quite so much. There's a few other options, but we won't worry about them at this point. So we've got this great. Now let's keep working in X-ray mode for a sec. Let me grab this whole thing. I'm going to move it upwards. Now I am in object mode, so I'm going to have to fix that soon. I'm going to hit R to rotate. I'm just going to type in 90 degrees. And because I'm in the side view, it's going to be locked to that one axis, which is great. Then I'm going to go ahead and move it so that it sticks out some amount. Then I'm going to do a Control A, and I'm going to apply the location to lock that in properly. And let's go into edit mode. Actually, before we go into edit mode, so what are we noticing? You guys are going to be like, well, you know, you say not to make too many sides, but look at this. This doesn't look round. This should be round, shouldn't it? As opposed to, you know, some sort of octahedral kind of shape. Well, the thing is, it can only get so round. We could, yeah, sure, we could add more and more faces to try to make it smoother and smoother, but it still wouldn't look perfectly smooth because what we actually have to look at is something called the shading model over here. So right now, by default, this object is flat shaded. If we hit smooth, now we've got an object that is smoothly shaded. If we look at it from the front, you can clearly see there's still just as many sides, but because they're smoothly shading the sides here, it looks a little bit rounder. Now, it's still a little bit wonky. Why is that? Well, the reason is that we don't actually want the front cap to be smooth shaded. That makes no sense, right? So there's a couple of different ways we can eliminate that. We can just select this. So what I've done, I was working in vertex selection mode until now, where I can select just the vertices. You can also go into edge selection mode, where you can select a whole edge. And you can go into face selection mode, where you can select a face. Now, I can take this face, and I can say that this face is flat. And I should do the same thing for the one in the back. And now if I tab out of here, now it looks quite a bit more reasonable. I mean, the shading's not perfect, because it is a relatively coarse cylinder, but, you know, it's not bad. The fact of the matter is it's way too big, even for my sort of cartoony, exaggerated look that I'm going for. I still think that it should be a little bit smaller. So I'm going to hit Scale, and I'm going to scale it in everything but the Y direction. And I'm going to bring it down to there. It's still going to be, you know, relatively big, but I think that's going to be fine. Actually, kind of looks like some sort of turret now, like a tower defense game. That's kind of interesting. All right, so I'm going to rename this from cylinder. This is going to be windmill fan. It's probably got a better name, right? All the propeller bits, the fan bits, the blades, I don't know what, but good enough. All right, so we've got that. Now, how are we actually going to attach things? Obviously, there are realistic ways to make it look like it. I think I might go for something that looks kind of like a Meccano type of thing. So what do I mean by that? Well, let me adjust my 3D cursor first of all, because I could keep spawning objects here, but wouldn't it be nice if the objects were to spawn exactly where I want them? Let's go into edit mode over here. And let me grab these objects in the front here. And let's say I want to snap my 3D cursor to the middle of this selection, right? Which would put my 3D cursor right here. Wouldn't that be perfect? Well, is there a way to do that? Let's see. Snap cursor to active. Yes-ish. Snap cursor to selected is what I want. There we go. So that was putting it at the active point. Because my origin's down here. I'm not sure actually why it went there. But snap cursor to selected is what I want. So now it's beautifully in the middle of the tip of my axle. So that's great. So let's go ahead and add another, oops, not in here. Let's do it. Let's add it to this existing mesh. We will add another cylinder here. It kept our preferences here of 8, which is fantastic. Now we will rotate it around the x-axis by 90 degrees. Good. We are going to scale it along the y. We're going to scale it way down. Let's go to the side view here. Scale it around the y to something like this. And we can do the same thing where we smooth shade it and then grab the bits at the end and then make them flat. But, you know, I realized maybe that wasn't the right workflow to show you. Let's talk about duplicating objects. I'm going to delete this one. Let's take this existing object that we've got here. Let's hit Shift-D to duplicate it. Now I'm going to hit escape so that it leaves it in exactly the same position that it already is. Because we know this is the right number of sides, the right way it's shaded. Great. So let's go ahead and just move this along the Y. Let's scale it around the Y axis down, and then scale it around the not Y to be slightly bigger. There we are. So now we've got some sort of hub here. Great. Let's keep adding stuff to this. This thing is 8-sided, which works out fine. So now we want some sort of fan blade that goes off to the side. So what is that going to look like? I'm not sure. Well, let's keep it super simple again. Let's go and create a cube. Let's grab this cube, move it over to the side. We're going to shrink it along the Z, something like this. Let me just grab this side here and sort of, oops, grab it towards the X and sort of yank that out. Is that a reasonable size? I think so. And let's take this and then move it down in the Z by a certain amount. Yeah, that's good-ish. Move it like this. You know what would be very handy is if we grabbed all this stuff and rotated. What's the proper rotation when you've got an 8-sided shape? So it's 360 degrees. Oh, numlock. I hate window. Like, who invented numlock? It's such bullshit. I'm so happy I'm at... No, that doesn't sound right. Oh, divided by 2. So 22.5. So if I rotate this by 22.5, there we go. So now I've got the flat edge over here. Good. That's what I want. And so now I need to, well, I still need to, whoops, kind of line things up to, something like this is fine. And let's check yeah, that's totally wrong. Scale in the Y. These are going to be quite narrow, probably. But then they need to attach. How do I want to attach it? Do I just run a stick through here? That's one possibility, but let's take this opportunity to talk about loop cuts. So what is a loop cut? Well, I'll just show it. Loop cut, right? So now we have cut a loop in our object. Everything is still connected, but it allows us to, add a little bit more flavor to our shape. So you do this with Control R, and then you sort of put it in a direction to choose where the loop cut should be. You can use the mouse wheel to add more cuts or to bring it down. If you have exactly one cut, then when you click with your left mouse button, you're then actually going to be in edge slide mode, so you can move it around, right? If I do more than one cut, then it doesn't give me an edge slide mode at this point because it sort of kind of doesn't make as much sense anyway. So I will make one cut over here. I will bring it up to sort of roughly here. I'm going to add a second cut and bring it kind of here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab these vertices here. And I'm going to, extrude them rather, into there. So we can install our fan into our shape. Like so. All right? Listen, I am not an artist. How many times do I have to tell you guys? I do think even I can probably add a little bit more detail to this just fine. I feel like this should scale down. And, right. Just scale in the Y. Just thin up that way. And then also, I feel like it should come down a little bit more of that. Like that. There. I feel like that is better overall. Now, because we are actually flat shaded, there's a little bit of an edge here, and I'm not opposed to that, to be honest, because it looks like it's sort of the rigid body here, and that's fine. I mean, we could texture this later to make this like somewhat translucent, right? To make it look like it's some sort of canvas or something, and that's more of a texturing thing with graphics and alpha and all that. The model, you don't put a lot of those details in there. All right, that's good. Now, do we repeat this process 4 times for the other fan blades? No, because we are lazy. I mean, smart. So what do we want to do? Well, we want to go to the forward view. We want to hit Shift-D to duplicate this bad boy, right? And then, well, we sort of need it to be over here and rotate it. No, listen, we're lazy. I mean, smart. So let's act like we are. Let me grab this object here. Let me snap the cursor to selected, so the 3D cursor is in the middle again. Let us take our pivot point to the 3D cursor. Let us select this fan blade, duplicate it. Now when we rotate, it rotates around the 3D cursor, so we want to rotate by 90 degrees. Duplicate, escape, rotate 90. Duplicate, escape, rotate 90. Bam. Aren't we smart? I mean lazy. Look at that. Wow, this is going to be amazing, because if someone tries to walk into the windmill, they're going to get their head clipped. Which I think is funny. I mean, we could shorten things, but meh, let them die. I suppose we could put the door on the side. It's probably more reasonable. Snap. There's a hotkey for this, but I never remember it. Snap cursor to center. Edit. Grab the door. Rotate 90 degrees. There. It's on the side of the building. Ugh. I don't like it. It feels uneven. Let them get killed. It's funny. It's like a mini putt sort of thing. So there we go. So we have a very simple windmill. It is not textured, but texturing we're going to have to do in another episode. See you next time, folks. Bye-bye.